Their finest hour. =RK=. Part 7. Chancellor's Suite. Senate Building. Coruscant. Just one more step, that's all Mace needed. He was almost close enough to end it all. Windu could already taste his victory. All he needed to do was to take the last step and swing down. The Jedi pushed through the Sith's desperate onslaught. Ice daggers stabbed into his back as lightning forks glanced off his armor. A cold wave passed through Mace. He could sense Sidious's shatterpoint. Just a few more moments and he would uncover it. It didn't matter. The Sith wasn't going to last that long. Windu finally took the last step. For a split second he was blinded by a virtual wall of crackling lighting before the attack abruptly cut off and he swung down his blade. It took the Jedi a heartbeat to comprehend that the Sith had somehow produced a lightsaber and was holding the locked weapons a hairbreadth from his forehead. Sidious used that small opening to regain the initiative. The blades became blurs that flashed when striking each other. Yet with every clash of the lightsabers, the Sith was forced to step back. It was time. Mace's hands moved guided by the Force. He feinted, and then locked blades with the Chancellor for a brief moment before using a supreme effort to overpower the old man and push his weapon away, leaving the Sith open. Windu's spirit soared when he saw the realization in Palpatine's eyes. The Sith attempted to jump back, though both knew it was going to be too late. The Jedi swung his weapon aiming for a killing blow. Sidious raised his hands up in the last possible moment and they were enveloped by lighting. The Sith unleashed it into a wide arc in a last desperate bid to save himself, all the while jumping back. Windu's purple blade went down a moment before a lighting bolt caught him in the left shoulder. The attack had enough power behind it to spin Mace in place and sent him falling on the ground. He didn't care. Before the lighting struck, Windu saw his blade slicing clean through the Sith's forearms. However, he cared very much when the floor lifted to meet his face and the world around him roared with the echo of an explosion. One quite powerful and close at that. The feeling of Jedi dying nearby came as an unpleasant confirmation that Mace was out of time. He had to finish the Sith now. Windu got to his feet and looked at the Jedi in the room. "I'll end it. Secure us a way out," Mace shouted. He hoped that they were able to understand him, because if the ringing in his ears was anything to go by, they were all half-deaf at best. Mace's position, looking towards the Chancellor's private office, gave him an excellent view of a wave of fire and screaming metal coming from the outer part of the residence. It was almost immediately followed by blaster blotsome couple of missiles that detonated almost immediately after flying through the door. Only a last-moment warning coming from the Force prompted Windu to avert his eyes and avoid being temporarily blinded. "Go," he roared to the Jedi with him and turned to face the Sith. The Chancellor was in a sorry state. He was cradled his ruined arms in front of his chest and glaring balefully at everyone. Yet, the madman had the gall to smile at him. "It ends now." Windu snarled and stalked towards the Sith. With every passing moment more explosions could be felt. More Jedi dying. The Sith's lips moved, however Mace couldn't make up the words. All he knew, or really cared about right then and there was the fact that Sidious had to die for everything he caused. The Jedi didn't consider, or really care that a cold current was flowing through him. He had surrendered to the Force. Became one with his Vapad and now, he would be its instrument in bringing it closer to the prophesied balance. Instead of feeling fear at his impending demise, Palpatine was shaking with laughter. Windu scowled. No matter. He raised his lightsaber and prepared to finish it. The Sith slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. Mace grinned savagely. This, his enemy being on the floor waiting for the killing blow. It few fitting. It felt right. Windu's lightsaber descended. And instead of cutting through the Sith, he was whirling around and parrying blaster bolts flying at his back. The first few shots went to the walls and ceiling, though then Mace sent the following barrage back at the fool who interrupted him. The Jedi glared at a woman in scorched Mandalorian armor. She was using a wrist blaster to shoot at him while keeping two other Jedi at bay with a flamethrower built into her other arm guard. A surge of unrelenting fury rose within Mace. He didn't have time for this nonsense. The Sith behind him would recover any moment now and attack him. Windu raised a hand and channeled all the fury he was experienced through the Force without really thinking about what he was doing. The armored woman froze in place, then she was lifted up by invisible grip. Mace's clawed fingers clutched into a tightly gripped fist. The Force obeyed with some reluctance, and the woman's armor buckled, then collapsed a bit around her chest, breaking bones and driving them into her flesh. Mace left her fall to the ground and turned to finish off the Sith. Hopefully the other Jedi would be capable enough to keep the enemies occupied for a few seconds. Fool. Sidious cackled from the floor. Do you think you just won? At least now Mace could hear again, though it wasn't as if the Sith could say something worth listening to. Yet, Windu found himself compelled to answer. Yes. I really do. Mace used the Force to raise up Sidious and then slammed his lightsaber in the Sith's gut. How does it taste, defeat? Windu asked. He didn't know it at the time, yet his eyes were glowing sickly yellow, a reflection of Palpatine's own. I might have lost, Sidious hissed. You haven't won. The dark side has its due. Windu sneered. No matter what happens now, the Sith were done. He was convinced of it. There was no way that Vale would Cold be more powerful than this monster, and Sidious was done for. Can you feel it, Jedi? The wheezed in a mocking tone. All you did is ensure the dark side won. Mace snorted. He pulled out his blade and stabbed the Sith again. And again. A monster like this shouldn't be getting a clean death. Besides, Windu's fury demanded something more. A blaster bolt slammed into his back. The Jedi's shield didn't activate and the shot slagged a lot of his armor, making him stagger and let release the mauled Sith. Windu's furious gaze tracked the source of the blaster fire. His eyes fell on the prone figure of the woman whose chest he just crushed. She was still somehow conscious and had defiantly raised a hand to shoot at him. She had discarded her helmet, and that allowed Windu to recognize her. It was that Mandalorian, the redhead who married Vale. Despite being in obvious pain, despite the blood leaking from her mouth or the fact that she was likely already dead and simply still clinging to life of sheer stubbornness, she was glaring defiantly at him. Then she shot at the Jedi again, though this time he contemptuously reflected her shot back, though it missed her face by a couple of centimeters, merely burning a bit of her hair. Windu glared murderously at her. Bloody Mandalorians. There were more of the fools engaging the rest of the Jedi in close combat behind the crippled woman. Enough, Mace shouted. His fury finally reached its boiling point. Can't you feel it, Master Windu? You just lost. The Sith taunted again. As if such lies could. For the first time since engaging Sidious, Windu paused to properly think. Even through the red haze of his fury, he could sense the truth in the Sith's words, but that couldn't be. This was the shatterpoint of the Sith. Of the dark side itself. Mace frowned, then forced his will upon the Force for the first time. He needed answers, now. The world around Windu shifted subtly. The Force obeyed, his talent finally had enough time to work too. And he saw it. The shatterpoint of the dark side. Both of them. He should have just killed Sidious earlier. That was the best chance to break the dark side Mace would have ever gotten. Because, now that he was aware of what exactly happened in the last few minutes, he knew he criffed up. Mace Windu was the dark side's second shatterpoint. He could see himself right now. His path forward from this moment on. It was shrouded in darkness. That realization almost broke the Jedi, but not quite. No. That was left for the third realization. For the last shatterpoint he didn't even knew was right here until it was too late. Mace stared at the broken figure of Bo-Katan. Bo-Katan Vale, that was her name now. She was the shatterpoint of the light. Vale's too. And she was dying because of a Jedi. By Windu's hand. Mace let out a single, long scream that expressed all the desperation of a damned soul who saw their whole world die around them. He could hear the Sith's mocking laughter. He could sense the promise of the dark side. All he had to do was surrender himself to it and the pain would be gone. Windu blindly threw his lightsaber at the Sith. Even without looking, he knew the blade impaled Sidious in the chest. With all his other wounds, the Chancellor was a dead man. The Jedi paid no real attention to Palpatine. Instead his eyes were centered on the dying woman. While the Sith was finally silent, the same couldn't be said about the dark side. Mace could still hear it whispering quietly in the back of his mind. This madness was simply too much. Bo-Katan began choking on her blood. Mace could feel the veil of the dark side falling upon the galaxy, all because of his actions. He averted his eyes from the dying woman and fled. =RK= General Vale's quarters. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. 3 hours from Camino. Hyperspace. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed and meditating to gather my strength and clear my mind before the coming battle. I knew that no matter what we found at Camino, it was going to be ugly. My battle meditation might very well be needed before the day was over, and I was going to need every bit of strength I was left in such a case. However, my mind was far from Camino right now. For the past hour the force had been tremulous. The best way I could describe it was a real cauldron of storms, fury, fear and anticipation. Something momentous was happening and I was far away from a position to influence it. Criff Crimson, the fool who created it, and Palpy for unleashing the never sufficiently damned thing. A few minutes ago, the force began practically shaking from tremors. Jedi were dying, a lot of them. It was a sensation I was accustomed to from the war. The hell? Did Palpy decide to begin the purge far ahead of schedule, or did the Jedi try something particularly unpleasant at the worst possible time? I concentrated, pushed my will through the cauldron that was the force and attempted to divine answers. It took me some time, but eventually I was able to see some disjointed images. A pair of temple guards falling upon a clone patrol. A young Padawan, couldn't have been older than 12, screaming in fury and charging a whole platoon who had an elderly Jedi woman surrounded and were pumping shot after shot at her. Something that suspiciously looked like Obi-Wan bleeding on the ground. With each image I saw, my anger grew. Damn all Jedi. Honorless bastards, the whole lot of them, I hissed and pushed yet further. I needed to know more. A huge dark presence revealed itself in the force. It was like a beacon and not hard to identify. Palpy had done hiding, it seemed, and bloody hell, the sheer raw power I could feel coming from him. Suddenly I was glad I didn't do something dumb like confronting him without a lot of backup. I dove through the force towards Sidious's presence and was assaulted with another wave of images. I got glimpses of Palpy cackling madly and Jedi dying. Of Windu engaging the Sith Lord and somehow managing to push him back. The dark side shook. It shifted and I could feel it watching me with anticipation. The next vision was a clear one. I saw my wife setting a Jedi on fire with a flamethrower. Good girl. The perspective changed. I saw Windu glaring at Bo, raising his hand. No bloody hell, then he simply crushed her chest. All I knew then was fury, which I channeled right back into the force. My mind gripped the image, which was trying to flee, and I used it as an anchor to seek Bo through the force. It took almost everything I got, yet thanks to both the vision and Palpy's fading presence acting as beacons, I could locate my wife even if she was right across the galaxy. My mind brushed hers. I could sense her pain, her anger. It stroked my fury into a blinding rage. Not again. I wouldn't lose another wife to the criffing Jedi. I would see the galaxy burn before I allow it. I used the wisp of a connection we had and poured all my power through it, with one directive: heal. The force surged through me, fighting to push even a tiny bit of energy through the vast gulf separating me from Bo. I felt as if my body was on fire and didn't care. Instead I grasped for more and more power. I knew that a small trickle of healing energy somehow reached Bo, but that wasn't enough. I needed more. I pushed further and every cell in my body lit up with agony. I screamed, but didn't stop. I couldn't. Palpatine's presence vanished, then the vision of Bo dying on the ground shattered and my awareness was violently shoved back firmly into my body was so hot I felt like melting. Sweat was leaking from every pore in my skin and every rasping breath I could gasp sent red-hot daggers of indescribable pain straight into my lungs. I don't know how long I writhed in pain on the ground before my body could bleed off all the force energy I was channeling without killing me. I was vaguely aware that if I had not gotten my body rebuilt back in the day, this experience would have killed me. It may still do it in the coming days and weeks. No. I snarled. I couldn't let myself die. I needed to find out what happened to my wife. If Bo died, I used my fury to push the agony away. The pain didn't matter. My wife did. Making sure the Jedi, both new and old, pay for their crimes did. I used the wall to pull myself into a sitting position. My gaze passed over my hand and what I saw gave me pause. I raised my arm, turned it around and looked at my fingers. My skin was leathery, shivered. For the first time since I could remember, my arm looked like my real age. I slowly got up and dragged myself to the fresher. I was still burning and needed water. Mirror 2. It took me a minute to stumble into the fresher, gulp some water and finally look at myself. An old man in his late 80s or early 90s looked back with two blazing yellow eyes. Yeah, I practically burned through my body all right. I just hoped I gave Bo a chance that would make it worth it. Bo, damn it. I glared at the mirror. Despite the agony I knew it was going to cause me, I used the force to activate the comm built-in just outside the fresher. Officer of the watch, this is General Vale. Have Admiral Holt meet me in the flag bridge in 30 minutes, I hissed and cut off the connection. I could no longer afford to waste any time on Camino, so it was time to change the plans. But first I needed to brew myself an alchemy concoction that would allow me to operate without crashing for the next few days. With my body practically criffed up, I no longer needed to particularly care about the nastier long-term side effects of the more potent stuff I could create. My body wasn't going to last more than a few months at this rate anyway. Their finest hour. =RK=. Part 8. Chancellor's Quarters. Senate Building. Coruscant. Sidious was dying. Even his mastery over the dark side wasn't enough to sustain his gutted body for long. It was only his anger, pain and glee fueling the force within him that let him cling to life for so long. At least that allowed the Sith to see those Mandalorian fellas slaughter all the Jedi they could get their hands on. Sidious felt even more of the fools die outside of his sight, yet that force-damned bastard Windu was getting away. The Chancellor snarled at the thought. The man killed him. He had to die for that. The bloody smile was back on Sidious's lips when his eyes fell upon the dying form of Vale's wife. That single fact somehow broke the light. The good general would be out for blood now. Sidious for once hoped that someone would succeed where he failed and kill Windu. Perhaps if he lived long enough he could personally slam the last nail in the Jedi's coffin instead of relying on contingencies. Sidious chuckled, and that made his ruined lungs convulse, sending his body into a shacking fit. H used the pain to draw a bit more of the force, though he was already feeling his power slip through his grasp. It wouldn't be long now. Yet, perhaps he could still have his chance. The fighting in the immediate vicinity was dying out. The Chancellor sighed. All he could do right now was cling to his life for as long as possible and wait. Hardly a fitting end for a Sith Lord. No matter. He would have the last laugh anyway. There were contingencies in place. One way or another Order 66 would go to the clones across the galaxy, and that would be just the beginning. Soon after he died, all his blackmail material on the Senate would be released. In this situation it would be more than enough to at least paralyze the Senate, throw the Republic into chaos, perhaps shatter it. Let Vale and whoever else was left pick up the pieces if they were strong enough. Sidious would have his revenge no matter what. The Chancellor's musings were interrupted by a new group of Mandalorians storming his private office. He saw most of them charge the few remaining Jedi who were fighting with their backs pressed to the wall where his desk used to be. Damn it, that was one nice and comfortable desk. Sidious chased that odd thought out of his mind and returned his attention on the Mandalorians. Two medics were busy tending Vale's life. She needs a trauma center right now. One shot at their apparent leader, another armored woman who was hovering nervously above them. What drew Palpatine's attention to her was the sheer fury he could sense coming from her. The Duchess. So much for her pacifism. Right now she felt deliciously murderous. Well, that at least proved that family was useful for something. That or a stasis pod. The other medic nodded, though none of them slowed down their ministrations. Do what you can, Satine snapped. The battle behind the Duchess was finally over. Palpatine gleefully saw the Jedi being shot to pieces and immolated with flamethrowers. That image by itself was enough to buy him a minute or two. It was that potent fuel for the dark side. Ambassador. The Chancellor wheezed. Now that the battle was no longer raging right on top of them, he could be heard. Barely. Satine's head snapped in his direction. She examined him for a moment, then shook her head. Yeah, his injuries were mortal. At least she deigned to come closer so she could hear him. We need more medics over here. Get some of the clones in here now. The Duchess ordered in her comm, then came and knelt to look him in the eyes. Chancellor. She nodded. Ambassador. Sidious was racked by another set of convulsions. You're dying. Satine bluntly stated the obvious. Thank you, I hadn't noticed. Palpatine's sarcasm was cut through by a coughing fit. Do you have a recording device? I have one last order to give. This treason can't be allowed to prosper. How did you know to come? Yes. They struck GAR HQ first. A few troopers managed to get away and tried to raise the alarm. Satine answered. The jamming. Palpatine nodded. Griff. We need more medics now. A clone shouted. The primary needs a hospital. A pause. No, I don't care. Get us reinforcements right now and shoot everything and everyone that gets in your way. The soldier snapped, then he made his way in the smashed living room. Sir. The clone trailed off when he could clearly see the Chancellor's state. I'm sorry, sir. We're too late. He added numbly. No matter. You stand as witness. I have one last order. Sidious rasped. Make sure it goes to the Gar at large. I will, sir. The clone straightened up. This is Chancellor Sheev Palpatine, identification. It took almost everything he had left to dictate his codes without interruption. Most of the rest went into suppressing his coughing for long enough to actually give the order. The Jedi are executing a coup on Coruscant. I'm myself mortally wounded. Gar HQ has been attacked in an attempt to decapitate the military. Palpatine coughed out a coagulating glob of blood. The world was getting dimmer, distant. He put everything he had left to strengthen his voice. All Gar personnel, execute Contingency Order 66. This treason can't be left to succeed. Sidious rasped. Why was so dark? The veil of the dark side embraced him like a warm cloak and there was no more pain. RK equals. You heard the Chancellor. Make sure that his orders gets to the troops, Satine sighed. Am I correct to assume it's meant for precisely this kind of thing? Yes, ma'am. We're to deal with the Jedi if they betray the Republic. The clone answered. This counts, I think. Yes. Excuse me, ma'am. The clone nodded at Satine. You two, stay with the Chancellor and do what you can for him. The rest of you, follow me. We need to get to a comm unit that can burn through the jamming. RK equals. Gar HQ. Coruscant. Finding Teen wasn't hard. All Anakin and the clones behind him had to do was follow the sound of battle and the bodies. There were dozens of gunned or cut-apart clones they had to run over. Even more dead or wounded, not all of whom were part of the security forces. From what Skywalker could see, at least a third of the casualties if not more were either officers or technicians who simply worked in here. A lot of them weren't even armed. They were just gunned down for being in the way. As if that wasn't enough to anger the young Jedi even further, what he could feel through the Force would have guaranteed it anyway. Jedi were dying on Coruscant. A lot of them, and some were people who he knew well. People he trained with. Friends. When Anakin finally caught up to Teen and his traitors, he was furious. He didn't bother offering them a chance to surrender. Even if he could, even if they hadn't been buzzed taking apart the last squad of a platoon that stood its ground in a futile attempt to stop them, Skywalker wouldn't have done it. He was too angry to even consider it. Instead he went on the offensive. Just as Teen cut through the last clone in his way, Anakin jumped forward and slammed his lightsaber in the back of a traitor obviously backing the rogue Jedi Master. Skywalker used the corpse to cushion his fall and whipped his blade up, thus cutting off the left arm of another traitor. The rest of the enemies finally comprehended that they were being hit from behind, however it was too late. Anakin used the Force to send them all tumbling on the floor behind him, where the sergeant following him and his men could gun them down at their leisure. That left him facing Teen. I should have known. You've chosen the Sith. Teen shook his head and went on the offensive. Those buzzer words caught Anakin off guard and made him pause for a moment. The hell? What Hutt-spawned madness was this? The brief confusion was enough to give Teen the initiative. Their blades clashed and Anakin was forced to take a step back, then another. Mad or not, Teen was actually quite good. That much Anakin had to grudgingly admit to himself. The man might have less talent for lightsaber combat than him, yet the Jedi Master made up for that with sheer experience. Skywalker scowled. That bastard attacked Obi-Wan and left him for dead. He couldn't be let to get away. Anakin's anger began enhancing his blows. His speed grew when instead of trying to clear up his head he embraced it and used it as fuel. The lightsabers slammed in each other with enough power that the hilt in Skywalker's hands actually shook. The blades met again and again. Every attack was anticipated and either parried or avoided by a hairbreadth. Anakin had seldom felt stronger than he did right now, yet Teen was meeting every swing with a ferocious blow of his own. The young Jedi could feel the anger coming from the older man. They were both using that emotion, and to his uncomfortable surprise, they were currently evenly matched. Skywalker grimaced. He needed more power. He had to win, to make sure the madness was over so he could go check on Padme. The moment he thought about his wife, his anger shifted. It was a cold thing now, full of determination. What's more, the very thought about Padme, the emotion coming when it recalled a fleeting image of her, it gave Anakin even more strength. He embraced it, welded it to his anger and pressed forward. For a few seconds Teen managed to hold his ground, yet then the initiative shifted. Anakin became subtly faster, stronger. This time it was Teen who took a step back. Then another and the Jedi Master finally lost the initiative. Teen had to continue retreating to avoid Anakin's blade. =RK=, Republic Cruiser Pillar of Eternity. High orbit above Coruscant. Captain, we just got a tight beam transmission from GAR Base Cato. GAR HQ is under attack. They've got unconfirmed reports of attacks on the Senate and RR&D facilities planetside and require immediate reinforcements on those locations. Their QRF is already on their way and they're mobilizing. The comm officer reported. I see. Captain File Macquarie nodded. Launch the cap. I want every clone trooper we have head for the armories and then the hangar. They'll be going planetside soon. Comms, give me a fleet-wide channel. Patch those Oni people in too. The captain ordered. He might have been in charge of just a light cruiser recently, a new hand in running a major vessel, not to mention one of the more junior captains in the Coruscant Defense Fleet, yet none of that meant he didn't know his duty. Their people on the ground needed help now, and he wasn't content to sit by while someone was probably trying to pull off a coup, no matter if it was really the Jedi, the Separatist or even Oni. You're on, sir. Thank you. This is Captain File Macquarie. My ship just received a reinforcements request from GAR Base Cato. We've got confirmation of an attack on GAR HQ as well as possible assault in progress upon the Senate and other vital facilities. I'm dispatching my ground complement with fighter escort as we speak and I advise you to do the same. Macquarie paused. Director Ula, I advise you that the force under your command shouldn't interfere with my small craft. Sir, we're being targeted by the Oni squadron. The clone in charge of tactical exclaimed in disbelief. Return the favor. Is our squadron ready to back us up? Renown stands by us. The comm officer reported. Warrior 2. The escorts are moving in to screen us. What about the rest of the fleet? The captain asked while examining the tactical plot. Magnificent is launching fighters and assault shuttles. Vice Admiral Grad is demanding that the Oni ships stand down. Damn it. Macau cursed. He could clearly see a whole bomber wing swing from their station near the Oni ships and head straight for the Magnificent and Graduate. Sir, Admiral Grad is hailing the fleet. Put him on speakers. This is Vice Admiral Graduate. I'm assuming command of the fleet. Director Ula, order your bombers to break off and stand out. I won't warn you again. All GAR elements in orbit, launch your ground units ASAP. Priority is securing the Senate, GAR HQ and all vital Republic military government and civilian facilities planetside. We'll sort out this mess when order down there is restored. That's negative, Admiral Graduate. You're interfering with an Oni operation. Stand down, or your action will be considered treason and I will be forced to open fire, Ula snapped. There was a long pause. This isn't your call to make. Only answers to GAR High Command and the Navy. You will stand down now, Director. Grad shot back. Macau could see the Magnificent's escorts move in to block the bomber's path. The cruiser was launching fighters too and the captain was sure that its Guardian system was already targeting the incoming small craft. Magnificent, Pillar of Eternity, this is your final warning. Stand down or we'll open fire. Ula ordered. Target her flagship. Weapons, if they open fire, respond in kind. Macau ordered. In the end it was the Admiral who acted first. The bombers flying at the Magnificent crossed an invisible line and the cruiser's Guardian opened fire. Couple of seconds later, the Oni squadron and their allies began firing. Fire at will. Macquarie ordered. Launch the transports when ready and move in to screen them. The captain frowned as he watched the tactical plot. Most of the fleet chose to remain neutral, though almost a third of it was converging on the Oni ships. At least there were dozens of assault shuttles and LARTs heading for the surface from the ships whose captains were prudent enough to have them prepare earlier. If he got away clean from this mess, Macau was going to keep a QRF ready in or near the hangars so they could be deployed at a moment's notice. Then he dismissed that thought and concentrated on the unfolding space battle. Most of Oni's ships were light cruisers and other escorts. Their Cathar and other allies were in fact more dangerous, and the only reason why they might last longer than it would take the ships backing the Admiral to get to grips with them. At least the spooks would be too busy surviving to mess up with the reinforcements dashing to Coruscant. == Security Center. GAR HQ. Coruscant. Colonel, the jamming is gone. Our comms are still criffed up, but we can at least receive transmissions. A technician exclaimed. Good. Get them fixed. Try figuring out what the criff is happening outside. Zack ordered and went over to check for himself. We need reinforce. ARG. This is Captain Felix Noon of the Senate Guard. Case Black, I say again, Case Black. We're under attack by Jedi and Cathar forces and need immediate reinforcements. All loyalist GAR personnel, be advised, Oni units are assisting the coup attempt. This is Captain Makawa, from the Pillar of Eternity, reinforcements are on the way. This is Commander Rasp, identification. Primary is secure. We need reinforcements and medical personnel on site ASAP. The primary is critically wounded. Be advised, we've got Mandalorian personnel on site and they're friendly. I say again, the Mandas are friendly. Further, I've got an order to transmit from the primary. From what Zack could gather, things outside were just as chaotic as within GAR HQ itself, if not more so. He was about to ask the tech again about the comms, when he heard the Chancellor's voice come over an open channel from the Senate. Zack heard the confirmation about a Jedi coup being in progress. Heard Palpatine's authorization and identification codes. Though what really mattered in the end was just one sentence: execute Contingency Order 66. It came from the Chancellor. It was lawful, and that's all that mattered. Zack and his brothers were trained even from before birth to obey orders, especially the contingency ones. While technically he had the freedom to disobey, he wasn't really capable of it. Nor did he want to given the circumstances. Get me the comms operational, now, Zack snapped to the technicians. And get me on all loudspeakers and comms within the building. This is Colonel Zack. We just got a transmission from the Chancellor. A Jedi coup is confirmed to be in progress. The Chancellor authorized Contingency Order 66. I repeat, execute Order 66. Palpatine was still alive, good. Anakin smiled briefly just as Teen stiffened. A moment later Skywalker followed suit when the sergeant behind him spoke. Stand the criff down, both of you, or we'll open fire. You're under arrest. What? Anakin exclaimed. He dared to glance back and froze when he saw all the clones pointing their blasters at him and Teen. Order 66 is in effect. You're under arrest. If you resist, we're to terminate you on the spot, Jedi. The sergeant snapped back. Teen bolted and the clones opened fire at him. Anakin was forced to deflect a few blaster bolts coming his way, which prompted the soldiers to concentrate on him. I'll stand down, just stop shooting at me, Skywalker exclaimed. He felt that something was terribly wrong and somehow knew that right now he was on a crossroads that would determine his future. The clones continued to fire at him, making him slowly fall back. It was only thanks to the armor he wore during his training and the built-in shield that the few shots that passed through his lightsaber didn't prove fatal. Anakin scowled and unleashed a telekinetic wave that sent the clones off their feet. He was torn. What was the right call? Go on the offensive? Retreat? Surrender? Chase Teen? Twilight. =RK=. Part 1. Throughout Republic space, all non-military holonet transmissions suddenly ceased. They were briefly replaced by the sigil of the Republic, which was proudly displayed above the words emergency broadcast. This unusual state of affairs continued for 20 seconds before it was replaced by the image of a human male who stood behind an empty metal desk. The only thing behind him was a plain green wall which gave no real clues about the location. Greetings, citizens of the Republic. I regret the need to address you in this unusual way. My name is Marikula, the director of the SBI. He smiled sadly. If you're watching this transmission, it means that I failed in my duty to safeguard the Republic and I am dead before I could warn the Chancellor and the GAR of an imminent and present danger for everything we hold dear. There is a plot to subvert the Republic by parties that already have their claws in both my own agency, the SBI, and at least ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence. I hope my warning goes out in time, However, if I've underestimated our enemies, you need to know this. Ula took a deep breath. Our intelligence services aren't the only ones subverted. The same is true for our supposed Mandalorian allies and elements of the Jedi Order as well. Ula pressed a button on the computer terminal built into his desk and a holographic window appeared above his right shoulder. It showed a conversation between a group of Jedi, Director Yvonne Felframoni and Count Dooku. Their discussion, planning how to cripple the Gar on Coruscant for long enough so they could successfully remove the Chancellor from power. I believe that the conspirators would initially try to present their coup as an attempt to save the Republic from the Sith. Marek's expression became grave. This couldn't be farther than the truth. Count Dooku's presence, a Sith himself, is evidence enough. They plan to sow confusion, cripple the Gar for long enough that our armed forces are unable to respond in time and eliminate some of the biggest obstacles to their plan. This treason isn't a misguided attempt to protect us from the Sith. On the contrary, it is a Sith plot aimed to destroy the Jedi who would stand against an overthrow of our democratically elected government and the first step in transforming our republic into a Sith empire. Unless the conspirators are stopped, they will blame the murder of Chancellor Palpatine and other officials, both civilians and military, who would have stood on their way, on the Jedi still loyal to the Republic and thus use the Gar to dispose of them. =RK= Gar HQ. Coruscant. For the rest of his life, Anakin Skywalker would wonder if things would have turned better or worse if he made another choice that day. Hindsight wasn't really helpful. It wouldn't be long before he figured out that things might have turned very, very differently. That at least in the short term he would have been hunted. All those things were obvious, yet none of them helped him figure out if he made the right choice that day. There would be nights in the future when he would lay in bed wondering if his relationship with Padme wouldn't be so rocky if he had chosen to resist his arrest. If he had fled and eventually joined the Jedi who survived Order 66 and weren't convinced to take the deal they were offered by the Senate, a blanket amnesty for those who weren't a part of the coup in exchange for fighting for the Republic. Perhaps he should have resisted. Perhaps he should have ran. Then he might have ended up walking a different path, one that wouldn't eventually lead him into a love-slash-hate relationship with his wife. And no matter what happened to the rest of the galaxy, it might have been worth it. Or perhaps doing so would have doomed him. Anakin never knew, yet kept wondering till his dying day. He often dreamed of that day, of making another choice. Yet, perhaps it didn't matter in the end. After knocking that pain in the ass of a sergeant and his men off their feet, Anakin didn't run. He didn't cut them down. He didn't fight. Instead he deactivated his lightsaber, levitated it to the ground between himself and the clones and then raised his hands as a sign of surrender. I don't resist. I'm giving up as you instructed. Until his dying day, Anakin Skywalker would wonder what exactly went through the troopers' heads at that moment. He could sense their distress. For a moment Anakin was sure that they would open fire anyway and he wasn't certain he could survive. On your knees. Hands behind your head. If I even think you're trying to pull one of your Jedi tricks, we'll shoot. The sergeant barked. Anakin glared at the clone. He was sorely tempted to lash out with the Force, yet he squashed the desire along with his rising anger and simply nodded. Then Skywalker silently followed the instructions. He was led to a detention center in the lower floors of the building and along the way he got an ever-increasing guard detail. By the time he was secured in a cell, Anakin was sure that there was at least a company in his immediate vicinity and there were more soldiers not too far away. Skywalker was both proud that they considered him such a threat and resentful towards the implication that he would turn on the people who he fought beside since the war began. The worst thing was that Anakin had only himself to blame for his predicament and he knew it very well. Not that such an admission made him feel any better. Can someone tell me what's happening? Anakin turned towards the door and asked. He knew that there were a lot of guards nearby. He could feel their presence. His only answer was silence and the unpleasant things that he could sense through the Force. =RK= Part 2 =RK= Flag Bridge. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. Hyperspace. En route to Camino. When Joanna Holt entered the flag bridge she shivered. The large compartment was mostly dark and very, very cold. Admiral. We have some unforeseen complications. A voice rasped from the twilight. It was somewhat familiar, it sounded not unlike that of General Vale, yet it was different too. This voice belonged to an old man, one nearing the end of his life, not to someone in their mid-30s at worst. The twilight shifted to reveal a figure hunched over the conference table. There was a steaming cup with something bubbling inside that the stranger found quite fascinating. It took Joanna more than a few moments to reconcile skin with the tone of an ancient parchment and white hair with only a few wisps of grey with the general she knew. Vale, what did you do to yourself? Holt snapped before she could think things through. My reach exceeded my grasp. The Sith rasped again and raised his head to look him in the eyes. This wasn't the same man she knew. It wasn't just his sudden change of age, it was his eyes. They were like two yellow stars blazing angry in the void of space. What do you really know about the Force? About her limits? That question took her off guard. This wasn't a time for a religious discussion, damn it. Joanna's anger grew as she watched Vale's lips twitch into a ghost of a smile. This wasn't a rhetorical question, Admiral. I've seen Jedi fight. I felt you. Connect this whole fleet into a single whole. I can't explain it. A shiver went down her spine. I felt crimson. Joanna spat the world as if it was a curse. Whatever this force of yours is, it's very much real. Holt eventually answered, after she shackled her anger and drove it under the durasteel veil of her professionalism. It is. There are very few limits on what's possible with it. The general nodded slowly and tapped the cup in front of him with a finger. That was enough to make the liquid inside bubbling increase into a sizzling hiss that threw droplets all over the metal table. They began eating through the surface with the hiss of an angry reptile. What is that? Joanna asked. Something impossible to brew without the Force, Vale sighed. A way for me to be useful when we hit Camino after I literally burned through my body. I hope there's some kind of explanation incoming. Joanna grumbled. That man was going to be the death of her. What in the name of all Corellian hells did he do, and why the bloody hells did he do it now, when they were about to enter battle? An explanation. Vale glared at his cup. I can give you many. The flag bridge grew darker. What looked like living shadows coiled around them both and apparently swallowed the light. Joanna shuddered at the unnatural phenomena. Vale on the other hand didn't appear to notice what he was doing. That or he didn't care, the bastard. There are few limits to what a powerful Force adept could achieve with the Force. Enhancing our bodies, influencing whole fleets. Making contact with people on the other side of the galaxy, if the situation is either right or wrong enough. He trailed off. I take it's the latter case. Joanna was almost sure of it. At the end something shifted in Vale's tone. Was that regret? I'll ask again, what did you do, General? I sensed the Force trembling with shocks. Jedi dying on Coruscant. I needed to know what in the name of the Force was happening. I needed to know that my wife was all right. Joanna frowned. Vale's voice almost broke there. And Jedi dying on Coruscant? How the criff did the Separatists reach the capital? It wasn't the Confederacy, Vale hissed in fury as if reading her mind, and wasn't that a terrifying idea? He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I was able to latch on the strongest Force signature on Coruscant. Used it as an anchor to get a glimpse of what the criff was happening. To find my wife. Vale spoke in a dull, distant tone, yet every word echoed a depth of fury Joanna was simply unable to comprehend. For a brief moment Holt was tempted to claim he was lying. That what he was talking about was impossible. However, she knew better. What Crimson did, what she knew for sure Vale could do. So much power concentrated in the hands of a single man whose allegiance she was unsure of simply terrified her. On the other hand, as the former captain of the Freedom and now as an admiral, Joanna herself had more power at her fingertips than most people across the galaxy could comprehend. The real difference was control. Checks and balances. She simply couldn't burn a world at her whim or go conquer one without good reasons that were approved by her superiors back home. Vale on the other hand, he himself was a weapon, and right now Joanna doubted that anyone but himself had ever been in control of his actions. What did you see? Joanna asked, while her mind was busy going over worst-case scenarios. Mace Windu crushing my wife's chest. Chancellor Palpatine dying. Vale's words were quietly, yet Holt couldn't help it but feel a terror when she heard his voice. He sounded like someone on the edge of madness. Just a heartbeat away from becoming berserk. She certainly didn't expect him to smile mirthlessly. The Jedi pulling a stab in the back I didn't see coming. It's almost commendable. If what Vale was telling her was true, if the Sis hadn't found a back door toward Coruscant, or even worse, somehow swept all resistance leading towards the capital. It actually made a twisted amount of sense. It was no secret that there were a lot of Jedi who saw Vael as a threat. That because he was a Sith he was the enemy they had to fight instead of the Confederacy. Joanna wasn't blind, nor deaf. She knew that those Jedi had some support in the Senate. It was at least plausible that they might have moved to cut off the people supporting Vael back home while he was far away. If the man was telling her the truth. If he wasn't mistaken. If he wasn't lying for some reason or another. Too many ifs. Too much that was uncertain. In the end everything went to one simple question: did she trust Vael? Unfortunately the answer was uncertain too. Joanna simply wasn't sure if she could. She knew who he claimed to be. Knew of his infamous exploits on Corellia thousands of years ago. She knew that if going by his actions he had done his best for the Republic. That he had been faithful to his vows as a military officer. However, Vael was a Sith and everyone knew they were treacherous creatures. Still, during that battle meditation of his, Joanna had touched his mind, both above Geonosis and when they had to burn down Crimson. She knew she could reasonably trust the man who once second Geonosis. She could admire the man who somehow turned the whole fleet into a single entity to protect them against Crimson. Joanna wasn't so sure about the man hunched above her conference table. I criffed up, Joanna. I've been criffing up and making things as I went ever since arriving in this bright future, Vael sighed. Do you know the real reason why I initially supported the Republic? Why I just went on with it once I made peace with everything I knew being dust for millennia? That was something many people had been wondering for about a year or so now. Most stopped caring as Vael achieved victory after victory for the Republic. If Joanna was to be honest with herself, so did she after Geonosis. I was content. I didn't have the Dark Council to worry about. I was back in command of a military unit and in the thick of things. Vael smiled wishfully. I was lazy too, he sighed and finally looked back at her. Why do you fight, Admiral Holt? For the Republic? For Corellia? Or for your family, friends and the men and women under your command? Why do you fight, General? It was impolite to answer a question with the question, yet Joanna needed to know. She felt it was vital to hear Vael answer and more importantly believe it if he gave her one that she felt acceptable. In the same time, her gut instinct was to say she fought for the Republic, for Corellia. It was an easy answer, the easy answer. It was true too, it just was far from the whole truth because it's my nature. Because I thrive on the chaos and madness of combat. Vael smiled sadly. To keep the few close to my heart safe. She almost missed the last words he whispered, something I failed yet again. Because it's my duty, to those under my command, to my people. For my family and friends. Joanna muttered. Both of them knew there was something Vael didn't say. Something he didn't need to spell. He was a Sith and vengeance was a part of his nature. What do we do now, General? Joanna asked. Vael stared at his drink then grabbed it in a single sure motion and downed it in one swing. Gah. This tastes. Griff. The general spluttered. Joanna would have found his antics amusing if it wasn't for the changes that occurred with his body. His hair began turning metal gray and the complexion of his skin changed too as a healthy color bled back into it. His back straightened and Joanna was sure that his very muscles became bigger to fill back his clothes in the way he looked before whatever turned him into an old man occurred. Huh? 2 months or so. A bit better than I feared. Vael muttered to himself. 2 months? Joanna inquired while still staring at the slowing down changes. When they finally stopped, the general still looked much older than he originally appeared but it was a far cry from the ancient apparition that waited for her on the flag bridge a few minutes ago. That's how long I've got left unless I find a way to permanently fix up my body. On the bright side, I'm back in the game. Now he sounded much younger too. We've got some contingency planning to do, Admiral. Unless you think it would be prudent to throw me in the brig and space the key? Now that he brought up that idea, Joanna was tempted. Doing so might be good for her sanity. Criffing Sith.